Tota pulcra es Maria, tota pulcra es Maria, et macula originalis non est in te. Et macula originalis.
And we'll talk about Purim and the Blessed Virgin Mary with a little bit of a travelogue in there. Purim. Sundown today starts Purim. What is Purim? Purim is a lot of things. Purim is the most joyful holiday on the Jewish calendar. It's the most joyful festival of the year. It's the celebration of a saving of the whole Jewish nation from extermination. And it was saved through the intercession of a heroine named Esther. And Esther was a figure, a picture, a forerunner, a type of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Just like Esther saved her people from the wrath of the king, Ahasuerus, so does the Blessed Virgin Mary intercede and save us from the wrath of the king, being God. Now, the fact that Esther is a figure of the Blessed Virgin Mary is not original with me. If you ever have the great good fortune and blessing to make it to Israel on pilgrimage, you will probably go to here, which is called Dormition Abbey. It's in Jerusalem. That's Dormition Abbey. It is a Dominican abbey, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. They could be Benedictine. And that abbey, that church, was built on the site where tradition has it that the Blessed Virgin Mary was assumed into heaven, passed from this life to the next life. Whether she died or not and passed through death, or whether she was assumed into heaven without having to pass through death, they're both acceptable opinions for Catholics to have. It's not dogmatically determined. And this church was built on the top of Mount Zion, where it was supposed to have happened. I believe that there are people who believe that she was assumed into heaven in Ephesus. All of these things are acceptable beliefs. There isn't dogma on any of these historical issues. But in any case, here is the church in Jerusalem, which is revered as the place where she was assumed into heaven. Now, this is the crypt of the church. This is the downstairs of the church. And there you have a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary lying on a couch. It's in a little rotunda, little internal rotunda, where she was assumed into heaven. And over this rotunda, there is a domed ceiling. And what is depicted on this domed ceiling, here you see her lying, the statue of her lying on the bed, and you see the domed ceiling above her, and you will see, and I'll zoom in a moment, in that domed ceiling, it's very beautiful mosaic. The central mosaic is of Jesus, and surrounding the mosaic of Jesus, there are 6 mosaics of women in the Old Testament. And who are those women in the Old Testament? Let's take a closer look at that domed ceiling. These are all types of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the Old Testament, right? That's the point of the ceiling above her. Now there you have Eve. You can tell it's Eve because she's handling the serpent. She's also naked, and she's also holding an apple. Eve was a type of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and in fact, we all know that the Blessed Virgin Mary is the new Eve, and as Christ is the new Adam, the Blessed Virgin Mary is the new Eve, and as the fall of man came about through the woman Eve, the redemption of man came about through Jesus, but with the instrumental help of the new Eve, Mary. And if you remember the hymn, I think it's Stella Mars, the hymn, reversing Eva's name, Ave, reversing Eva's name. The Ave in the Ave Maria reverses the name of Eva. The next medallion here, a mosaic, is Miriam, who sang the canticle in the Old Testament. She was the sister of Moses. And when they crossed the Red Sea, dry shod, she sang a canticle of praise to God. And some of the Magnificat of Mary, in fact, repeats some lines from Miriam's canticle. Then we have here, that's Yael. Yael was a figure in the Old Testament who slew the evil king by driving a stake through his skull. And the Blessed Virgin Mary, as we know, slew Satan. That's not quite the right terminology, but she defeated Satan, right? She trampled Satan under her feet. She was the instrument to destroy Satan, just like Yael was the instrument to destroy the evil king that was going to destroy the Jewish people. And then we get Judith, who cut off the head of, I believe it was Holofernes, who was another evil king who was going to destroy the Jewish people, again a figure of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And here we have Ruth. Ruth, if you know the word ruthless, right? Ruthless means without compassion. There is a word in English which isn't used very much, ruthful, seriously, meaning having compassion. Ruth was a picture of having compassion for her neighbor, in this case for her mother-in-law, and her kindness and her generosity and her compassion for her mother-in-law ended up, first of all, giving her a very happy life, but also making her one of the ancestors of Jesus, in fact. One of the lineages of Jesus, maybe both of them, I don't remember offhand, has Ruth as one of the ancestors. And then finally, the sixth figure is Esther, and that's who we're going to talk about today. Esther is probably the closest type of Mary because she was very beloved by the king, entirely pleasing to the king, very, very beautiful, I might add, and she interceded for her people and turned away the king's wrath so that we would instead have the king's compassion and protection. So that's why Esther is a figure. That's one of the reasons Esther is a figure, not the only reason Esther is a figure of Mary. There's Judith holding up the head of Holofernes, and then we have Yael driving the stake through the wicked king's head, and then we have Ruth carrying the sheaves. That's part of the story of Ruth. And there we have Miriam playing the tambourine. And there we have Eve with the serpent behind her, the apple in her hand, and her long hair tactfully covering her nakedness. And finally, of course, we have the medallion of Esther. So I'll zoom in on that a little bit, make it a little bit bigger. Whoops. So we can admire it. Okay. There. Okay. Why did I do that? There are books written on the types of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the Old Testament. A major source of the meaning of the stories of the Jewish people in the Old Testament is as a prefigurement of Christianity. Okay, so here's my plan. My plan is I'm going to read a shortened version of the story of Esther, which is really the story of Purim. It occurs in the book of Esther. The whole book of Esther is just the story of Purim. I'm reading a little children's version of the story. It all began in ancient Persia in the 4th century BC. The holy temple that had stood in Jerusalem was destroyed more than 50 years earlier, and the Jews were the subjects of a mighty Persian Empire that extended over 127 kingdoms. 3 years after King Ahasuerus ascended the Persian throne, he celebrated by throwing a grand 180-day-long party for all his subjects. After that party, he hosted a 1-week-long smaller party for the residents of his city, and his queen, his wife, Queen Vashti, hosted her own party for the women of that city. On the 7th day of this party, Ahasuerus' heart was, quote, merry with wine, and he commanded his wife Vashti to appear before all the partying men because he wanted to show off her beauty to them. Vashti did not want to cooperate, and at the advice of his advisor, Ahasuerus ordered Vashti's execution because she didn't obey the king. So then the king, what's he going to do? He has to replace the queen. So he sends out his agents throughout the kingdom to round up the most beautiful young virgins in the kingdom to put in his harem, so he could choose one to be the queen. The most beautiful, actually, young virgin in the kingdom was Esther. And Esther pleased the king so much that he made her the queen. Esther was Jewish. Esther was an orphan. Esther had been raised by her uncle, Mordecai. Mordecai advised Esther when she got recruited for the king's harem and also the beauty pageant to be his wife, not to let anyone know that she was Jewish, or she didn't let anyone know that she was a Jew. Mordecai, meanwhile, hung out outside the palace to keep an eye on Esther. Shortly after Esther became queen, Mordecai overheard 2 of the king's chamberlains discussing a plot to assassinate the king. Mordecai had them reported, and the traitors were hanged. Meanwhile, Haman, one of Ahasuerus' ministers, was promoted to the position of prime minister. Haman was a Jew hater. In fact, he was a descendant of the nation of Amalek, which were like the #1 enemies of the Jews. Immediately after the promotion, the king issued the promotion of Haman to be the essentially prime minister, the #2 in the kingdom. The king issued a decree ordering everyone to bow down whenever Haman appeared. Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman because it was forbidden for Jews by Jewish law to bow down to anyone but God. Haman was infuriated, and he resolved to take revenge against all the Jews, and he threw lots to determine the lucky day when he would implement the plan. The lot fell on the 13th day of the Hebrew month of Adar. Haman approached Ahasuerus and offered him 10,000 silver talents in exchange for permission to exterminate the Jews. Told Haman, the money is yours to keep, and the nation is yours to do with as you please. You can tell Haman was in very high favor with the king. Haman immediately sent proclamations throughout the king's land, sealed with the royal signet ring, ordering the people to rise up against the Jews and kill them all, men, women, and children, on the following 13th day of Adar. That was the day that the lot fell to. Haman threw lots to see what day he should exterminate the Jews. When Mordecai learned what was happening, that the Jews were scheduled to be exterminated, he tore his garments, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went through the city, crying loudly and bitterly, till he came before the royal gate, clothed in sackcloth and ashes. Likewise, throughout the provinces, the Jews went into deep mourning with fasting, weeping, and lament. Most of them put on sackcloth and ashes. You can see why this reading was the reading for today at the Tridentine Mass. Some of the story of Esther was because this whole story is kind of a picture of Lent, right? This period of penitence and repentance that will avert the severe decree of the king. Esther then summoned one of the king's eunuchs who was at her service and asked him to find out what this action of Mordecai meant and the reason for it. Esther was not aware at this point of the order to exterminate. Mordecai had the eunuch give Esther a copy of the written decree for the destruction of all the Jews, and the eunuch was instructed to ask Esther to go to the king to plead and intercede with the king on behalf of her people. Now, there was a problem with this, which is that if you appeared before the king without being invited, off with his head. The penalty was death unless he extended his scepter to indicate that he wasn't offended by the fact that you appeared before him uninvited. So Esther first says, look, it's a death penalty to go before the king when you're not invited, and I haven't been invited to appear before him for 30 days. Mordecai replied to her, who knows, perhaps it was for a time like this that you became queen. So at least in those days, some people believed in divine providence. Maybe it was for this moment that Esther sent back a message to Mordecai saying, have all of the Jews fast 3 days without eating or drinking for me, and I will fast and my maids will fast, and at the end of the 3rd day I will present myself to the king, and if I perish, I perish. At this point, Mordecai prayed, and recalling that all that the Lord had done, Mordecai prayed to the Lord and said, Lord, Lord, King and ruler of all, everything is in your power, and there is no one to oppose you when it is your will to save Israel. You made heaven and earth and every wonderful thing under heaven. You are Lord of all, and there is no one who can resist you, my Lord. You know all things. You know that it was not out of arrogance that I acted thus in not bowing down to Haman. I would have gladly kissed the soles of his feet for the salvation of Israel, but I acted as I did so as not to place the honor of a mortal above that of God. I will not bow down to anyone but you, my Lord. And now, Lord God, King, God of Abraham, spare your people, for our enemies regard us with deadly envy, and are bent upon destroying the inheritance that was yours from the beginning. This is Christians, this is human beings. This is, think of this enemy as being Satan, and and his legions. And of course, the evil spirits regard us with deadly envy and are bent upon destroying the inheritance that was God's from the beginning. We were created, right, to be souls with God in beatitude in heaven for all eternity, to give God pleasure in some sense. We are the inheritance of God. The enemy, out of envy, is bent on destroying the inheritance that was God's from the beginning. Continuing with Mordecai's words, do not spurn your portion, which you redeemed for yourself out of the land of Egypt. Again, don't spurn your portion, which you have redeemed yourself. We can say this to Jesus, right? We can say, look, you underwent the passion to redeem us. Please forgive us. Please give us the grace to make it to heaven. You did the hard part going through the passion. Now finish the job and see that we get the grace that's necessary to get to heaven. Hear my prayer, have pity on your inheritance, and turn our mourning into feasting, that we may live to sing praise to your name, Lord. Do not silence the mouths of those who praise you. So you see how Lenten all of this is, that all of this prayer could be transposed into what we're doing in Lent. Now, Esther, before she appears before the king, Queen Esther, seized with mortal anguish, fled to the Lord for refuge, right? She's scared. She expects to have her head cut off the next day. Or taking off her splendid garments, she put on garments of distress and mourning. In place of her precious ointments, she covered her head with dung and ashes. She afflicted her body severely, and in place of her festive adornments, her tangled hair covered her. Now that's pretty hardcore, right? Covering your head with dung as well as ashes. Then she prayed to the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, my Lord, you alone are our King. Help me, who am alone and have no help but you, for I am taking my life in my hand. From birth I have heard among my people that you, Lord, chose Israel from among all nations, and our ancestors from among all their forebears, as a lasting inheritance, and that you fulfilled all your promises to them. But now we have sinned in your sight, and you have delivered us into the hands of our enemies, because we worship their gods. You are just, O Lord. This, by the way, is true of us, of course, every time we sin, every time we have a fear of human respect, every time we're concerned about what other people think of us instead of what just God thinks of us. We have worshipped their gods and sinned in his sight. But now they are not satisfied with our bitter servitude, but have sworn an oath to their idols to do away with the decree you have pronounced, to destroy your inheritance, to close the mouths of those who praise you, to extinguish the glory of your house and your altar, to open the mouths of the nations to acclaim their worthless gods, and to extol a mortal king forever. Lord, do not relinquish your scepter to those who are nothing. Do not let our foes gloat over our ruin, but turn their own counsel against them and make an example of the one who began this against us. Be mindful of us, Lord. Make yourself known in the time of our distress, and give me courage, King of gods and ruler of every power. Put in my mouth persuasive words in the presence of the lion, and turn his heart to hatred for our enemy, so that he and his co-conspirators may perish. Save us by your power, and help me, who am alone and have no one but you, Lord. You know all things. You know that I hate the pomp of the lawless and abhor the bed of the uncircumcised or of any foreigner. You know that I abhor the sign of grandeur that rests on my head when I appear in public. Your servant has never eaten at the table of Haman. From the day I was brought here till now, your servant has had no joy except in you, Lord God of Abraham. God, whose power is over all, hear the voice of those in despair. Save us from the power of the wicked, and deliver me from my fear. Now, I'm just going to back up a step. Let's think about who Esther is. She is all beautiful. She is the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. She is the most pure woman in the kingdom. Is this beginning to sound like the Blessed Virgin Mary? Your servant, from the day I was brought here till now, your servant has had no joy except in you, Lord God of Abraham. From the day that the Blessed Virgin Mary found herself on earth, did she have any joy except in God? But she's not praying for herself. She's praying for her people. Again, just like the Blessed Virgin Mary, using the favor she has with the king, using her own virtue to shed an umbrella of protection over her people. Sound like the Blessed Virgin Mary? Anyway, on the third day, ending her prayers, she went before the king. She glowed with perfect beauty, and her face was as joyous as it was lovely, though her heart was pounding with fear. She passed through all the portals till she stood before the king, who was seated on his royal throne, clothed in full robes of state, and covered with gold and precious stones, so that he inspired great awe. As he looked up in extreme anger, because she was entering his chamber without permission, without being invited, right? His features fiery and majestic, the queen staggered, turned pale, and fainted, collapsing against the maid in front of her. But God changed the king's anger to gentleness. In great anxiety, he sprang from his throne, held her in his arms until she recovered, and comforted her with reassuring words. "What is it, Esther?" he said to her. "I am your brother. Take courage. You shall not die. This order of ours applies only to our subjects. Come near." Raising the golden scepter, he touched her neck with her, embraced her, and said, "Speak to me." She replied, "I saw you, my lord, as an angel of God. For you are awesome, my lord, though your countenance is full of mercy." As she said this, she fainted. The king was shaken, and all his attendants tried to revive her. It's a long story. If any of you have ever heard, probably none of you had, the Jewish expression, the whole Megillah, you're not going to go through the whole Megillah when somebody starts telling a long, drawn-out version of a story. The reason they say the whole Megillah is the word for the book of Esther. And every Purim at the synagogue service, they go through the whole Megillah. It's a very long reading. And so that's why Megillah has become an expression among Jews, meaning an endless story. So after Ahasuerus shows mercy to Esther, Ahasuerus asks, "What is your request?" And Esther responds, "I would like to invite the king and Haman to a small feast I have prepared." So the king and Haman joined Esther for a feast. During the feast, the king again asked Esther if she had anything to request. "Yes," Esther responded. "I would really appreciate it if tomorrow again the king and Haman would join me for a feast. At that time I will tell the king my request." So Haman left the party, a happy and proud man. Oh, what honor he was being accorded, right? He was the only guest to the feast. It was just Esther had invited the king and Haman. Oh, the honor he was being accorded. But standing at the king's gate was Mordecai, who still refused to bow to Haman, and Haman was enraged. When he arrived home, his wife and advisers counseled him to erect a gallows and then to go to the king and request permission to hang Mordecai. Haman excitedly went ahead and put up the gallows. There's going to be a turnaround in this story. Sleep eluded the king that night, so he asked his servants to read for him the royal chronicles. They did so, and they read from the chronicles how Mordecai saved the king's life when two of his chamberlains had hatched a plot to kill him. The king asks, "Was he rewarded for this fine act?" "No, he was not," the servants responded. At that moment, Haman entered the king's courtyard. His purpose? To ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai. But before Haman could utter a word, Ahasuerus addressed him, "My Haman, in your estimation, what shall be done to a person whom the king wishes to honor?" Now the king was referring to Mordecai, but Haman thought he was referring to himself, Haman. So Haman responded, "Bring a royal garment and a royal horse, and let one of the king's nobles dress the man and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'So it is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor,'" because Haman thought it would be him. "Great idea," Ahasuerus responded. "Now go get the garments and the horse and do it for Mordecai the Jew. Do as you say for Mordecai the Jew." Haman had no choice to comply. On the next day he went and honored Mordecai the way the king had ordered, and then immediately rushed to join the king and Esther for the second feast. "What is your request?" a curious King Ahasuerus asked Esther at the feast. "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king," Esther pleaded, "and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted me by my plea, and the life of my people by my request. For my people and I have been sold to be annihilated, killed, and destroyed." Esther then identified Haman as the person who had brought this about. The king was greatly angered. When he was then informed that Haman had built the gallows for Mordecai, he ordered that Haman be hanged on those very gallows. Okay, so Haman was hanged, he was dead, but the evil decree was still there that all the Jews in the kingdom should be killed on the 13th of Adar, that all the citizens should rise up and slaughter the Jews. So Esther got the king to give permission, the Jews permission to defend themselves against their enemies. So the Jews had gotten permission to defend themselves against the people who tried to kill them. So on the 13th day of Adar that year, the Jews throughout the Persian Empire mobilized and killed the enemies who had wanted to kill them. Among the dead were Haman's 10 sons. Esther asked the king's permission for the Jews to have one more day to destroy the enemy, and the king acceded to her wish. On that day, the 14th of Adar, the Jews worldwide celebrated, and the Jews killed more of their enemies. The Jews then rested and celebrated on the 15th of Adar. Mordecai and Esther established a holiday to commemorate these amazing events. Jews worldwide celebrate on the 14th of Adar, while the residents of walled cities celebrate on the 15th of Adar. This holiday, called Purim, is the most joyous holiday on the Jewish calendar. So that is the story of Purim, and I think you can see the parallel with Lent to avert the severe decree, and then the intercession of Esther with the king to turn around his decree, like the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary for us. Now there's another parallel, which is, remember that first queen Vashti, who was disobedient to the king, who was replaced by the second queen Esther, who was obedient to the king, and therefore was able to serve as this great intercessor, saving the lives of all of the God's people. Well, who was the first queen who was disobedient to the king, who is God? That was Eve. Who was the second queen who was obedient to God? That, of course, was the Blessed Virgin Mary, is the Blessed Virgin Mary. So that turnaround between the first queen who was disobedient and died, eventually, Eve, to the second queen who was obedient and brought about the redemption of all of God's people, who was Mary, reversing Eva's name to be Ave Maria, is another parallel there. I am going to pull up some more pictures. This is a Megillah. This is a Jewish scroll of the story of Esther, the book of Esther. This is only one page of it. This is not the whole Megillah. You see how beautifully illustrated. You see all the paintings of Esther, of the angel holding. There's an angel. Looks like the angel is holding the prayer in front of Esther. On the lower left hand, there is the king going into Esther's bedchamber in the lower right. There is one of the feasts in the upper right, and so forth. There you have that feast. There you have the musicians performing at the feast. There you have what's probably the king going in. I don't know what that is. Maybe it is the servant going in trying to get Queen Vashti to show her beauty. I don't really know. There you have, of course, the Hebrew manuscript. There you have an angel. Here is a beautiful painting, I think, of Mordecai and Esther. Now, this is the most popular in art scene from the book of Esther, which is the fearsome king and Esther fainting into the arms of her maidservant out of fear of the king's wrath. Oh, here's just a painting of of Esther in the king's harem. This is another painting. This is Antoine Coypel. I think that's about 16th century, but I don't remember offhand, of Esther fainting into her maidservant's arms in front of the king. But I thought this was rather scandalous. But Esther apparently was overdoing using her women's charms, I suppose, to soften up the king. And then finally, the last of these paintings that I have here. Here we have the king giving the death decree against Haman, and Haman being dragged out. At the Purim service, it's kind of fun in synagogue because, yes, the whole Megillah is read, which is very long and boring, but there's something done that's a little bit entertaining, especially for the small kids, which is everyone is given a noisemaker. In my day, they were little wooden boxes. Do I remember right? Little wooden boxes with a little metal strip on them, and if you spun them around the handle, the metal strip was plucked, and they made this boing, 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 boing noise. And whenever the name Mordecai is read in the reading, all the kids are supposed to cheer, yay, yay, yay. And whenever the name Haman is read, kids make the noisemakers go. There is a tradition, at least in the Hasidic community, that it is a good deed to drink wine on Purim, to get drunk on Purim, in fact, to be as joyful as possible on Purim. So drunk that you cheer at the name of Haman and boo at the name of Mordecai. This is straight from the missal for today. For today, the lesson is from the book of Esther, chapter 13. In those days, Mordecai praised the Lord, saying, Lord, Lord, Almighty King, etc., etc., etc. I read that prayer. Isn't that cool? That happened. It doesn't happen every year on Purim, because the Jewish calendar is out of sync with what we have, the Gregorian calendar. Purim means lots in Hebrew because Haman threw lots to determine what day he would have all the Jews killed, and that ended up being the day that the Jews killed all their enemies. So Purim is the name for this holiday, and the word itself means lots. So that was that question. Okay. Class dismissed.
Tota pulcra es Maria, tota pulcra es Maria, et macula